Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something you might have filed away under things of the past, maybe. But the numbers, well, they tell a very different story.
Yeah, that's right.
We're diving into the global market for film cameras.
Exactly. We've been looking at a stack of market sales revenue projections, giving us a pretty good look ahead from 2021 all the way through 2033.
And our mission, really, for you is to cut through the noise, kind of unpack this data, and figure out not just where film camera sales stand right now, but where they're actually headed worldwide.
And, it's probably not what you'd guess. The journey these numbers trace is...
Yeah, it's surprising.
Okay, so let's unpack this then. What's the big headline from the source material? Well, the big one is, the global film camera market is projected to grow.
Grow, really?
Yeah. So back in 2021, the total sales revenue was sitting around $2.79 billion.
Okay, nearly $2.8 billion. And looking forward.
The projections show that number climbing. It's expected to reach about $3.33 billion by 2025. And then, quite significantly actually, a projected $4.76 billion in 2033.
Wow, okay. So what does that mean in terms of average growth?
Well, what's fascinating here is that represents a global compound annual growth rate, CAGR, of 4.55% across that forecast period. That's the average annual growth rate.
Okay, 4.55%. So this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
We're talking about a market many people, probably myself included, assumed was steadily shrinking,
Yeah.
if not completely gone.
Right, like a niche thing at best.
Exactly. But this data is telling us it's on a pretty solid growth path for the next decade. So the obvious next question is where? Where is this growth actually happening?
Okay, yeah, let's break it down regionally if we connect this to the bigger picture. North America is a major part of the puzzle.
Okay.
It had an overall market value of, $1.02 billion in 2021.
Right, over $1 billion already.
And the source projects it to grow to $1.19 billion in 2025, and then hit approximately $1.66 billion by 2033.
So that's a healthy regional CGR then?
Yeah, we're set to 4.22%. Pretty healthy.
And breaking that down further, within North America?
Well, the United States makes up the lion's share of that. It started at $844 million in 2021.
Okay.
And it's projected to reach $1.35 billion in 2033. So that's a solid 4.08% CAGR.
And Canada?
Canada also sees growth, yeah. From about $140 million in 21 up to $202 million projected for 2033. Its CAGR is a bit lower, though, 3.30%.
Okay, so steady growth in the U.S. and Canada. Anything else stand out there?
Yeah, this is interesting. What really stands out in North America is actually Mexico.
Mexico?
Yeah, it started from a much smaller base, only about $32.5 million in 2021.
Right, quite small compared to the others.
But it's projected for really explosive growth, more than tripling to $106.18 million by 2033.
Wow, okay.
And its projected CAGR is 8.61%. That's the highest in the region by a pretty significant margin.
So that just shows you, doesn't it? The picture isn't uniform even within one continent.
Exactly. Big variation.
Okay, let's jump across the pond then. Europe. What's the story there?
So Europe. The overall market value there was around $527 million in 2021.
Okay.
Projected to reach $823 million by 2033. And the overall CAGR is 3.89%. A bit lower than North America overall.
Right. And the major countries, Germany, UK, France.
Yeah, those major players like the UK, Germany, and France, they all show consistent increases over the decade.
Okay.
The UK goes from about $74 million to $102 million by 2033. Germany starts bigger at $104 million and goes up to nearly $150 million. France is similar, $79 million up to $109 million.
And then Italy, Russia, other big ones.
Yeah, countries like Italy and Russia also see growth, kind of following similar patterns.
Yeah.
Spain, Luxembourg, the Scandinavian countries, they show more modest, steady increases.
Okay, so solid growth in those core European markets, but is there anywhere showing that kind of surprising jump we just saw in Mexico?
Absolutely, yes. There's a category called Rest of Europe.
Ah, okay. The smaller markets grouped together.
Exactly. It groups many smaller or maybe emerging markets in Europe.
Yeah.
And this category shows remarkable acceleration.
How remarkable?
Well, it starts at just $6.85 million in 2021.
Tiny.
Yeah, really small. But it's projected to skyrocket to $137 million by 2033.
Whoa. That's huge growth.
It's a dramatic increase, yeah. Powered by a 14.55% CAGR.
14.5%. Okay, that definitely raises the question. As you say, where specifically is that happening within that broad category, and what on earth is driving it?
Exactly. That's a key insight.
Wow, okay. That's a massive relative increase from a small base. Let's head east then. Asia Pacific, how's that looking?
Asia Pacific, yeah. This is already a huge market, obviously. Started at $802.6 million in 2021
Right, big numbers already.
and is projected to grow to $1.3 billion by 2033. So
Yeah.
a solid 4.13% CAGR overall for the region.
Okay. And the breakdown there, China, Japan, India.
Yeah, the big economies definitely dominate the absolute numbers here. China's projected to jump from nearly $269 million to over $419 million.
Right.
Japan from $142 million to $214 million. India from about $127 million to nearly $189 million.
Okay, strong growth. South Korea, Australia.
South Korea, Australia, and Southeast Asia as a group are also on strong growth curves, yeah.
Got it. Are there any places they're showing more sort of stable, flatter growth?
Yeah, Singapore and Taiwan show more stable growth patterns. They both start around, say, $32–33 million in 2021 and only reach up to near $37 million by 2033. So consistent, yes, but not that high-octane growth we just discussed.
Right, not the Mexico or rest of Europe story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, and here's where it gets really interesting again. It echoes the pattern we're seeing elsewhere.
Okay.
The rest of ATAC segment.
Ah, another rest of category showing something different.
Precisely. Like rest of Europe, this category shows explosive growth. Again, from a pretty small starting point. It was just $13.6 million in 2021.
Right.
But it's projected to reach a stunning $156.3 million in 2033.
Wow, okay. Even bigger absolute jump than the rest of Europe.
Yeah. And its CAGR is 16.46%. That's actually the highest globally in the source material we have.
16.5% CAGR. Okay, so that really highlights significant momentum in potentially less obvious markets across Asia Pacific.
Absolutely. Something's clearly happening there.
Okay, moving down to South America now. What's the picture there?
South America overall market was $284.6 million in 2021. It's projected to reach $409.4 million by 2033.
Okay, and the growth rate?
The CAGR is 3.26%, so a bit lower than some other regions we've discussed.
Right. And the key countries? Brazil.
Brazil is the largest market, yeah, growing from $123.3 million to about $170.7 million. Countries like Argentina, Colombia, Peru, Chile. They also show steady increases in market value over the forecast period. Solid, but not spectacular.
Okay, so following the pattern, are we going to see a rest of South America jump?
You guessed it. Similar to other regions, the rest of South America category shows a notably higher growth rate compared to those larger individual countries.
Okay.
It goes from $14.5 million in 2021 to $53.6 million by 2033.
And the CAGR for that?
It's 8.84%.
Right, 8.84%. Not quite the crazy numbers of rest of Europe or APAC, but still significantly higher than Brazil or Argentina.
Exactly. Again, suggesting pockets of stronger growth within these broader regions.
Okay. Where haven't we covered? The Middle East.
Right, the Middle East. This presents a slightly different picture, actually.
Oh, how so?
Well, the overall market value shows more modest growth compared to, well, pretty much all the other regions. It goes from $153.3 million in 2021 to $185.5 million in 2033.
Okay. That does sound slower.
Yeah. Countries like Egypt, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, they all see increases, but the pace is just slower overall.
Who's the biggest market there?
Saudi Arabia is the largest individual market. It moves from about $47.5 million to $54.5 million.
Okay. So the growth story is just, less dramatic in this region compared to the others we've looked at.
Pretty much. Although even within the Middle East, the rest of Middle East segment does show a relatively higher growth rate for that region.
Okay, same pattern, just less pronounced.
Exactly. It goes from $19.8 million up to $33.2 million by 2033. Still growth, but not the same scale.
Okay, right. Saving perhaps the most surprising for last then, Africa.
Yes, Africa.
Yeah.
Our source definitely highlights this as one of the fastest growing regions globally.
Okay.
In terms of percentage growth, that is. It starts from a very, very small base.
How small are we talking?
What's fascinating here is just how small. The entire African market for film cameras was only valued at $3.1 million in 2021.
$3 million for the whole continent.
Danny. But the projections are, well, enormous in relative terms.
Go on.
It's projected to explode to $113.6 million by 2025.
Wow, just in 4 years.
Yeah, and then reach a staggering $376.1 million by 2033.
Goodness, that's an absolutely massive percentage leap.
It really is. It results in an impressive regional CGR of 16.14%.
16% CAGR. Okay, so a tiny starting point, but projected for incredible momentum. Does the data break that down at all?
It calls out South Africa and Nigeria specifically within this. South Africa is projected to grow from just $1.2 million
Wow.
to $143.7 million.
Wow.
And Nigeria from $1.4 million to $164 million over that period.
Incredible trajectories.
And mirroring the trend we've seen everywhere else.
Let me guess. Rest of Africa.
You got it. The rest of Africa market, while starting from an almost negligible $0.46 million in 2021, like $500,000,
Practically nothing.
is projected to reach $68.5 million by 2033.
Okay. And the CAGR there must be astronomical.
This segment holds the highest individual CAGR in the entire source, a remarkable 17.67%.
17.7%. Yeah, as you said, it's not just growth. It's almost like a market segment just appearing out of almost nowhere in just over a decade.
Pretty much. It's really quite something.
So, okay, let's try and synthesize this. What does this all mean? If you pull together all these numbers, the data clearly paints a picture that's, well, very different from the common perception, isn't it?
Absolutely. The global film camera market, far from being some dying relic, is actually projected for steady, consistent growth over the next decade. We're talking adding billions in overall revenue.
And the most insightful takeaway for me, listening to all this, is where that growth is concentrated.
Exactly. That's the key nuance here. While established markets like the U.S., Germany, Japan, they're seeing solid increases, which is important.
Right. The big absolute numbers are still there.
Yeah. But the real engine, especially when you look at the rate of growth, the percentage growth, it's happening in these specific sub-regions and continents, often starting from a smaller base, yes, but with these incredibly high CAGRs.
We're talking Mexico.
Mexico, yeah.
Yeah.
The rest of the categories in Europe, APAC, South America, and particularly, as we just saw, the explosive emergence of Africa as a really significant market by 2033.
So the data, it strongly indicates a sustained and in many areas rapidly growing demand for film cameras.
It does.
It just directly challenges that easy assumption that, digital completely killed film.
Yeah, that narrative seems too simple based on this.
The numbers suggest there are powerful drivers, maybe diverse drivers, keeping this market not just alive, but actually thriving in some pretty unexpected places.
And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, the fact that these growth hotspots are so geographically diverse, that hints that the reasons people are buying film cameras might be different depending on where they are in the world.
Right, so it's not just one single global trend, maybe.
Possibly not. It could be a combination of cultural factors, economic shifts, artistic trends, nostalgia maybe, all playing out differently in different contexts.
Well, this deep dive into the numbers has definitely reshaped my view of the film camera market, I have to say.
I, too, digging into it. The key revelation really is that this isn't a static or declining market at all.
No.
It's dynamic, it's expanding, and it's showing remarkable vitality, particularly in these emerging or perhaps previously niche segments globally.
Okay, so given these really surprising numbers, here's maybe a provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider. Building on this data, who exactly is driving this surprising resurgence? Especially in regions like Africa or Mexico or those rest of categories that are showing such explosive growth.
Yeah, what's behind those massive CAGR?
Exactly. What does this data suggest about how things like technology, art, maybe nostalgia, consumer preferences, how are they interacting uniquely in different parts of the world to create this pattern? And maybe critically, what does this kind of rapid market expansion actually look like on the ground in these high CAGR regions? How different is it from the steady growth elsewhere?
Lots to think about there. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the data.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.
Okay, let's dive right in. Film cameras. You'd probably think they're basically relics now, right? Gathering dust.
Yeah, totally. Like something from a bygone era.
Right.
But the sources we looked at, they tell this, well, really surprising story. A market that's actually finding some new life.
Exactly. So that's what this deep dive's all about. The global film camera market.
And our mission really is to figure out why. Why is this old school analog tech seeing a kind of resurgence? It's this interesting mix of, old technology and new trends, new market forces.
Even now in our super digital world.
Right.
So first things first, just so we're all on the same page.
Right.
What exactly is a film camera in the context of this research we're digging into?
Okay, so at its core, it's that classic camera, the one that uses actual photographic film, that light-sensitive stuff to capture an image.
Right, the kind you have to get developed.
Exactly. Needs chemical processing.
Okay.
And the report covers a pretty wide range, your standard 35 millimeter, medium format, even large format cameras. Oh, and instant cameras too, like Polaroids or Instax.
And people use them for
Yeah.
all sorts.
Yeah, everything from just casual snapshots to like serious professional art, even some niche industrial applications, apparently.
Okay, so the big question then, why are people picking these up again? The research highlights a few key drivers, doesn't it?
It does. One really major factor that comes up is rising disposable income, globally speaking.
Ah, okay, so people just have more money to spend.
Pretty much. As people have a bit more financial freedom, they're, more likely to spend on hobbies, maybe creative outlets, or just things that offer a unique sort of experience.
And that ties into something maybe a bit deeper, yeah. The data seems to point really strongly towards nostalgia and this desire for self-expression.
Definitely. Especially among, say, younger demographics, film cameras have almost become this cool creative tool, sometimes even a fashion statement.
Right, that whole tangible process, the vintage look, getting an instant print from some models.
hmm It really resonates. The sources mention this particularly with younger women, creative communities looking for different ways to express themselves, something unique.
It's not just about the money or looking back. It's becoming a deliberate artistic choice,
Exactly.
a medium in itself.
But okay, let's be real for a second. It can't all be positive growth.
Mm.
What are the big restraints? What's sort of holding this market back?
Well, the biggest, most obvious challenge is just the sheer dominance of digital technology.
Yeah, smartphone cameras.
Everywhere. They offer instant results, incredible convenience, and let's face it, they're way more cost-effective over time compared to buying film, paying for processing.
That constant cost.
Right. So this easy, readily available substitute, it's a massive hurdle for film camera growth, especially in the mainstream.
That digital convenience is really the main
Battleground, yeah, absolutely.
But the sources also mention ways the market is finding opportunities despite that.
Oh, for sure. A really significant opportunity lies in just how widespread e-commerce is now. Online platforms. So reaching the right people.
Exactly. It lets manufacturers, sellers, everyone connect directly with that quite specific niche audience all over the world. It overcomes, geographical limits.
And things get even more complicated when you factor in global trade, right? We see things like trade tariffs affecting electronics components.
Yes, that's in there too. Tariffs mentioned in the sources, some pretty significant ones, they disrupt how companies get their parts, and that can bump up manufacturing costs.
Which forces them to adapt.
Yeah, it's leading some players to look into diversifying their supply chains, maybe looking at manufacturing options in places like India or Vietnam, for example. It just shows how these big global economic forces ripple down even to a niche market like film cameras.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how a market for essentially older tech is being shaped by very modern consumer trends, global economics, and always that shadow of the digital alternative.
And you see big players like Fujifilm Holdings America mentioned in the sources. They operate across both traditional film and modern stuff like medical imaging. It shows that blend.
Right.
So yeah, bringing it all together, this deep dive shows the film camera market isn't just like clinging on. For its dedicated audience, it seems to be thriving in its own way.
Fueled by.
Fueled by, well, rising incomes, that powerful nostalgia factor, the need for self-expression, and it's being enabled by online selling platforms.
But still fighting that digital convenience battle.
And navigating those bigger economic currents like trade.
Yeah. And, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What does this continued, maybe even growing, interest in a slower, more tactile, chemical-based way of taking photos? What does that tell us about our relationship with instant digital tech today?
That's a good question.
What is it about these older processes, the ones that maybe demand a bit more patience, a bit more effort? What aspects of that might resonate with you personally in a world that's just built for speed?
Definitely something to think about.
Okay, that wraps up our deep dive into the global film camera market.